My name is Celeste Rowan, 31 years old. The air in my childhood home felt like it had been sealed inside a snow globe for 8 long years, untouched and unyielding. The gold pendant at my throat trembled against my skin as I paused in the foyer, where garlands drooped across the banister and the familiar scent of pine mixed with roasting turkey. My mother had kept everything exactly the same: the porcelain nativity scene, the glowing string lights wound carefully around the mantel, and the family photos where Merrick and Clayton's faces still dominated the frame. My absence in those pictures seemed louder than the ticking grandfather clock in the corner. I stepped into the dining room, and the sight almost made me laugh. The table stretched out like a battlefield, polished to a gleam, place settings lined up like soldiers awaiting orders. Father rose to his full height at the head, wineglass raised, his voice carrying the same commanding timbre that had ruled my childhood. "It's time we discuss the future of Moore Manufacturing," he announced. The words struck with the weight of a gavel. His tone left no room for interruption, no room for breath. My brothers straightened in their seats, Merrick smoothing the cuff of his shirt, Clayton tapping his finger lightly against the stem of his glass. Their eyes flickered with anticipation, like lieutenants waiting for their promotions. As I approach retirement, I've made decisions about leadership. Father's gaze swept the table, resting heavily on Merrick. He will take over as CEO. Clayton will serve as COO. The words slid past me like a cold draft. I was not even an afterthought. Mother's hand fluttered to her napkin, smoothing it again and again, eyes locked on her plate as if the pattern of roses could provide refuge. Merrick shot Clayton a quick glance, victory confirmed between them without words. "And Celeste?" Mother's voice broke through the silence, tentative as a sparrow daring to land. Father cleared his throat. "Celeste has chosen her path." His eyes deliberately avoided mine. "She prefers her toys, the tech industry, playing with gadgets." My knuckles tightened around the stem of my water glass, the condensation slick against my skin. 8 years ago, I would have bowed my head, accepted this dismissal like the obedient daughter I was raised to be. But 8 years had changed me. 8 years, and billions of dollars later, calm replaced the heat that should have risen in me. "Understood," I said, my voice steady. Father nodded, mistaking my composure for submission. In that moment, memory ambushed me. The day of my graduation, standing in this very room, diploma in hand, bright with the audacity of 23. I'd tried to explain my startup idea, the power of neural networks to revolutionize medical diagnostics. Father had chuckled then, slicing into roast beef with casual cruelty. "Sweetheart, leave real business to your brothers. Find a good husband, someone successful." Merrick and Clayton had laughed with him, their state school business degrees enough to eclipse my MIT education. Mother had patted my hand with that same absent smile. I had left that night, packed boxes in the back of a rusted Toyota, a heart equal parts grief and fire. I worked 3 jobs, lived on 4 hours of sleep until one investor, just one, believed in me. Now, Father's fork clinked against china, the sound final. "We'll draft the paperwork after the holidays. Of course, Celeste, you could still marry someone successful. That option never expires for a woman." The table grew taut with silence. Clayton shifted uncomfortably. Merrick avoided my gaze. Mother stayed fixed on her plate. "Thank you for clarifying where I stand," I said, setting my fork down with a deliberate click, a note of finality that rang across the table. I met Father's eyes directly. His face flickered with something unfamiliar. Was it unease? "Now, Celeste—" "No, please," I interrupted softly. "You've made your position clear. I appreciate the honesty." Merrick and Clayton exchanged uneasy glances. They had always been the golden sons, praised for every average achievement, while my accomplishments were brushed aside like dust. Tonight, their silence sealed their complicity. Mother's eyes darted between us, desperate for the conflict to dissolve. But she had never once stood against Father, not in 40 years of marriage, not even for her only daughter. She would not begin now. And it dawned on me, my worth had always been conditional here. Theirs was intrinsic, mine a question mark. As Father resumed discussing transition plans, my mind wandered to the summers I had spent modernizing outdated processes at the factory. Ideas ignored the moment they threatened to outshine my brothers. This company, this inheritance, would never belong to me. I lifted my water glass, my reflection distorted in the crystal. Tomorrow, I promised myself. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tonight, let them believe they still held the power. Let them believe the game was theirs. The hum of conversation was broken by a sharp intake of breath. Holy! Nico, my 15-year-old nephew, clamped his mouth shut too late, eyes bulging as he stared at the tablet in his hands. The boy nearly dropped it in his panic, fumbling to keep hold. What is it? Merrick asked, annoyance sharp. Nico's gaze darted to his grandmother, then back to me. Aunt Celeste, you're on Forbes. The room froze. Merrick's fork clattered. Clayton's wineglass paused midair. Mother's hand flew to her throat. Let me see that, Father demanded, voice cutting through the paralysis. But Nico turned the tablet toward the entire table. And there I was, my photograph beside a number that detonated Christmas dinner like a bomb. 2.8 billion. Father's lips moved as he read aloud, his voice hollow. Neuromedicines acquired for $4.5 billion. Revolutionary neural network technology expected to transform neurological diagnostics worldwide. 8 years of struggle, of ridicule, of exile, compressed into a headline they could finally comprehend. Mother smoothed her napkin with trembling fingers. Well, this is unexpected. Father shoved back from the table, his chair scraping against hardwood. His composure cracked for the first time. We need to talk. He pointed toward the living room. Now. I rose, taking my wine glass with me. Mother hurried after us, while Merrick and Clayton exchanged glances heavy with calculation. The living room was a shrine to curated history. Photographs lined the walls. Merrick's graduation, Clayton's wedding, father flanked by sons at industry events and hunting trips. My absence in those frames screamed louder now, like a ghost erased on purpose. Father remained standing, shoulders squared, as though posture alone could restore the balance of power. I sank into the sofa, swirling the wine in my glass, waiting. How long were you planning to keep this from us? His voice shook, not with pride, but accusation. I wasn't hiding anything. I took a sip of wine, savoring the slow burn. The acquisition was announced 3 months ago. You could have called. Mother perched at the edge of an armchair, looking smaller than I remembered. The light caught the lines of fatigue etched into her face. And you? Father's jaw tightened. You never thought to share this news with your family? I held his gaze, unblinking. Like you shared with me? The words landed heavy between us, undeniable. Father's silence stretched like a taut wire, humming with tension. He removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose as though the act of seeing me, the reality of me, was suddenly too much to bear. I never thought you'd actually succeed with that computer nonsense, he muttered finally, his voice low but sharp enough to cut. I was protecting you from disappointment. There it was, the truth he clung to like a shield. Protection. That word had been his excuse for every dismissal, every rejection, every time he chose my brother's mediocrity over my effort. Mother's lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. She sank further into the armchair, her hands gripping the armrests as though bracing against a storm. From the doorway, Merrick cleared his throat. I should have said something. His voice trembled, the polished confidence I'd grown up resenting now cracked. When Celeste came to me for seed money, back when she first started, I turned her down, because Dad said we shouldn't encourage unrealistic dreams. My chest constricted. I remembered that night like a scar, the weight of rejection heavier because it came not from a stranger, but from my own brother. You knew how much I needed that loan, I whispered. Merrick shifted, guilt clouding his face. I was just following his lead. Father straightened, seizing the moment. Your brother was doing what was right. My advice has always guided this family. We built more manufacturing on my instincts, not daydreams. My hand trembled slightly on the stem of my glass, but I kept my tone calm. What about my letters? The room chilled. Mother's eyes widened, then dropped to her lap. I wrote to you every Christmas, I said softly. For 3 years. Updates on the company, on what I was building. I begged you to respond. Mother's fingers twisted the napkin in her lap. Her voice came out a whisper. Gordon thought it best not to answer, until you came to your senses. You intercepted them? My words hit harder than I intended, incredulous, wounded. Her head lowered further. I thought it would be easier for you. I didn't want you chasing illusions. The betrayal washed over me in fresh waves. 3 layers of rejection. Father's dismissal, brother's refusal, Mother's silence, all conspiring to remind me I was an outsider in my own bloodline. Father's voice sharpened. Your success is exaggerated. These tech valuations are smoke and mirrors. They'll revise that number down within months. Clayton entered then, hands shoved deep in his pockets, his face composed, but his eyes wary. Dad's right, he said, his tone calculated. These bubbles burst all the time. Look at .coms. Look at crypto. You think this will last? Before I could answer, Merrick's tone shifted like a snake shedding its skin. We always knew you had potential, Celeste. Remember when I helped you with your computer class in high school? His smile was thin, too eager. I stared at him. You copied my homework and got us both detention. The color drained from his face. Clayton looked away. Mother, desperate to patch the unraveling fabric of the evening, forced a smile. I've always told everyone how proud we were of you. I knew you'd do well, just not this well. Father nodded quickly, slipping into a new narrative as if he had practiced it. The more drive for success. You got that from me. It's in your blood. The audacity was almost laughable. 8 years of silence, erased in minutes. Now, suddenly, they were rewriting history, retrofitting themselves into my journey as cheerleaders, guides, visionaries. It was theater, and I was the unwilling audience. For a fleeting moment, something inside me, small, wounded, ached to accept it, to let them rewrite the story, to bask in the warmth of belonging. Maybe if I let their lies stand, I could finally be embraced as part of the family. But then my phone buzzed. A text glowed across the screen. I always knew you'd change the world. So proud of the girl who stayed after class to learn Python when everyone else had gone home. Miss Dobbins, my high school computer science teacher, the one who spent afternoons helping me apply for scholarships behind my father's back, the one who never once told me to give up. Her words sliced clean through the fog of revisionist history. She had seen me. She had believed. She had told me I was enough before anyone else did. I slipped the phone back into my pocket, holding onto her truth like a lifeline. When I looked back up, my family was still performing, still scrambling to claim ownership of my success. Merrick leaning forward with a forced grin. Clayton muttering about long-term strategies. Mother nodding along, tears at the corners of her eyes. Father sitting taller, as if proud of his imagined foresight. Do you expect me to thank you? I asked quietly. The room stilled. Do you expect me to rewrite my memories? To believe you were there, encouraging me through sleepless nights? Through rejection after rejection? Through meals I skipped to pay server fees? Do you want me to believe you wrote back? That you believed in me? Mother covered her mouth with trembling hands. Merrick and Clayton shifted uncomfortably, twin expressions of panic. Father's jaw locked. Don't twist this, Celeste. We are your family. Family protects each other. Family silences each other too, I replied. The clock ticked, slow and suffocating. In that silence, I understood the depth of what I was up against. They weren't just trying to take credit. They were trying to rewrite reality itself. If they could convince me of their loyalty retroactively, they would absolve themselves of 8 years of betrayal. But I remembered. Every unanswered letter, every closed door, every patronizing pat on the hand. And now, as I sat surrounded by people desperate to reconstruct me into their narrative, I realized I held the only truth that mattered. I would decide how this story was told. Sleep never came easily in this house, and that night was no different. I lay in the childhood bedroom that still bore the faint outlines of glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling. Once they had comforted me, whispering of galaxies beyond Nebraska cornfields. Now they mocked me, reminders of how small I had once felt here. My mind drifted back to the years after I left. 3 jobs stitched together like a fraying quilt, wiping down cafeteria trays at dawn, manning the library desk between classes, and serving pie at a 24-hour diner until my hands smelled perpetually of grease and disinfectant. Each night, exhaustion pressed me flat, but even then I would open my laptop, forcing code to life through bleary eyes. The startup was fragile, built on hope and caffeine. Investors turned me down 23 times, their rejection letters piling like unpaid bills. Too risky. No proven market. Nice idea, but not scalable. Each dismissal dug deeper than the last. I still remember the night I almost quit. I was sitting cross-legged on a sagging dorm mattress, pitch deck scattered like confetti around me, red ink notes screaming failure. I'd spent 3 years clawing at a dream, and the dream was clawing back, leaving me bloodied with doubt. Tears blurred the code on my screen. Then came the email. A father in Detroit. His 8-year-old daughter had been misdiagnosed 3 times. Doctors told him nothing could be done. But my neural network prototype had flagged a rare, treatable form of epilepsy within minutes of running her scans. You gave my daughter her life back, the father wrote. I printed the email, folded it into my wallet. Even now, years later, I carried it, edges worn soft. That email kept me upright when no one else did. The memory flickered, and I turned onto my side, staring at the closed bedroom door. I thought I'd hardened over the years, thought the betrayals had scarred into numbness. But being back here, under this roof, was like reopening old wounds. A knock interrupted my thoughts, soft, hesitant. Aunt Celeste? A small voice called. I sat up, surprised. Come in. The door creaked open. Lacey, Clayton's daughter, slipped inside, clutching a laptop to her chest. She was 13, tall for her age, with a nervous energy that reminded me painfully of myself at that age. Sorry if it's late, she whispered. My computer science teacher gave us this coding project, and I thought... She trailed off, shifting her weight. I thought maybe you could help. For a moment, I simply stared at her. No one in this family had ever come to me for help before. Of course, I said, patting the bed beside me. She climbed up, opening the laptop. The code filled the screen. Clumsy, scattered, but alive. She chewed her lip. Mom says computers are for boys. But I want to be like you, not like them. Her words pierced through me like sunlight through a shutter. My throat tightened, but I forced a smile. Then you'll be better than me, because you'll start younger, and you'll know more. She grinned, shoulders loosening. Together we worked through her project. She typed cautiously, glancing at me for approval. Every time her code compiled successfully, her eyes lit up. Hours passed unnoticed, until the screen glowed with the final output. She let out a squeal of delight, hugging the laptop to her chest. You did it, I said softly. You did it, she echoed in a whisper, as if the words were too precious to release into the air. When she finally slipped back to her room, laptop hugged tight, I sat there long after, staring at the empty doorway. For the first time since walking back into this house, I felt a spark of something other than bitterness. Hope. Maybe the cycle could break, starting with her. The next morning, sunlight streamed through lace curtains, harsh in its cheerfulness. I found myself wandering to Father's office. The mahogany desk was the same, the shelves still crowded with miniature tractors and framed awards from industry galas. Even the air smelled the same, Old Spice and polished leather. He looked up as I entered, spectacles perched low on his nose. You wanted to see me? I stayed standing. No, you wanted to see me. He gestured for me to sit. I've been thinking about what happened at dinner. I didn't mean to hurt you, Celeste. I only wanted to protect you. There it was again, that word. Protect, I repeated, sitting slowly. When you told me I was wasting my time? When you dismissed my graduation speech as a phase? When you encouraged my brothers to laugh at me? His jaw flexed. I was trying to save you from failure. The tech world eats people alive. 9 out of 10 startups fail. I leaned forward, meeting his eyes. You weren't protecting me. You were silencing me. His eyes widened slightly, the faintest crack in his armor. Every time I shared an idea, you called it gadgets. When I asked for help, you said find a husband. You didn't want to shield me. You wanted to control me. The fire in my chest was steady now, no longer wild. And you know what? I didn't need your permission to succeed. I needed it to feel worthy of success. That's the difference. For once, he had no reply. I stood. There's a family dinner tomorrow. I think it's time everyone heard the real story. That night, I sat alone with my laptop, reviewing files. Old emails, bank statements, pitch decks, rejection letters, evidence, truth. My father wanted to rewrite history, but I would not let him. I created a folder and labeled it simply, Truth. When the clock struck midnight, I closed the laptop, feeling the weight of the decision ahead. Tomorrow, this house of cards would come crashing down. The following evening, the dining room looked deceptively serene. Candles flickered, china gleamed, and polished silver reflected the chandelier's glow. But beneath the surface, tension simmered like an unspoken storm. My father raised his glass, repeating the same gesture he had performed countless times before, his voice carefully measured. To family, he declared, and to the guidance that shapes us. His eyes lingered on me, as though daring me to contradict the story he was rehearsing for everyone's benefit. I lifted my glass, but did not drink. Instead, I set it down with a deliberate click, the same sound I had used the night before, the sound of defiance masquerading as composure. "I'd like to add to that," I said, rising slowly. All eyes turned to me. Merrick and Clayton shifted uneasily. Mother's fingers tightened on her napkin, and Father's jaw hardened. "To truth," I continued, my voice steady, "because truth is what binds us, even when we pretend it doesn't exist." The silence that followed was thick enough to choke. I let it linger before I began. 8 years ago, I said, my words deliberate, I stood in this very room with my MIT diploma. I explained how neural networks could change medical diagnostics. That was June 4th, 2017. I remember the date because it was the day I realized my family saw me not as a daughter, but as a distraction. Father shifted in his seat. "Celeste?" "No, you'll listen." My tone brooked no interruption. "I applied for 23 loans in the months that followed. All denied, including one I asked Merrick to co-sign on July 15th. He refused because you told him to." I turned to my brother, whose face paled under the weight of exposed memory. Mother blinked rapidly. She hadn't known this detail. For 18 months, I worked 3 jobs. Starbucks on Cooper Avenue from 5 to noon, tech support at Midwest Data from 1 to 6, freelance coding until 2 in the morning. I lived on 4 hours of sleep and a single certainty, that my work mattered. That was November 2019, when Dr. Chen and Tides finally invested. By 2022, our platform had diagnosed thousands of patients that doctors had missed. The words spilled into the room like stones hurled into still water, each one breaking the surface of their illusions. Aunt Patricia, seated further down the table, whispered something sharp to Uncle Ray. The ripple spread. Merrick's hands shook. "Dad told us if we gave you money or connections, we'd be cut from the will," he blurted suddenly, his voice raw, as though the secret had been festering too long. Clayton's fork slipped from his hand, clattering loudly. "Merrick, what are you doing?" Mother's head snapped toward Father. "Is that true?" Her voice trembled. Father's face flushed, but his silence was answer enough. Tears welled in Mother's eyes. "I intercepted your letters because he told me to," she confessed, her words broken. "He said letting you fail would teach you to appreciate family more." The room erupted. Aunt Patricia pushed back her chair, her voice sharp. "Gordon, you told us Celeste refused your help." "Enough!" Father barked, his voice cracking like a whip. "I did what I thought was best. I was protecting her from delusion, from humiliation." "By crushing her?" Mother's voice broke like glass. For the first time in my life, she wasn't echoing him. She was challenging him. The weight of decades pressed into that moment. Every denial, every silence, every command masquerading as care. I looked around the table, at the faces of aunts and uncles who had believed his narrative, at my brothers who had obeyed him, at my mother who had betrayed me out of fear, and I understood with piercing clarity. My father's power had never been his fists or his wealth. It was his ability to rewrite the story so convincingly that everyone else repeated it. "Not anymore." "I don't need your protection," I said, my voice rising above the chaos. "I needed your faith. And when you refused to give it, I built faith in myself, alone." The room stilled. My father's face, flushed with fury, suddenly looked older, worn. "Celeste," he said, his voice quieter now, almost pleading, "I only wanted to keep you safe." I shook my head. "No, you wanted to keep me small." The words landed like a final blow. I reached for my glass, lifting it again. "To truth," I repeated. This time several voices echoed me. Aunt Patricia's, Uncle Ray's, even Merrick's, his voice shaky but certain. Father sat motionless, staring at me with eyes I could no longer read. I placed my glass down with another sharp click, sealing the moment. The game he had always controlled, the story he had always written, was no longer his alone. For the first time in this house, in this family, I wasn't asking for a seat at the table. I was claiming it. 2 weeks later, I found myself back in Father's office, summoned by a terse message passed through Merrick. The mahogany desk loomed between us as always, but something in his posture had changed. He leaned forward, glasses perched on his nose, papers neatly aligned in front of him as though order could disguise desperation. "We've been thinking," he began, his tone unnaturally bright. He slid a folder across the desk. "More manufacturing should reflect all of the Moore children, not just the boys." I opened the folder. Inside was a mock-up of new company letterhead, Moore and Daughter Manufacturing. The navy blue font gleamed, glossy and corporate. My stomach tightened. "We've already printed promotional materials," Merrick added quickly, gesturing to a stack of brochures in the corner. "The announcement goes out next week." Clayton cleared his throat, trying to sound confident. "The board thinks your profile could attract investors. You know, with your reputation." Father clasped his hands together, his eyes sharp. "You've done well for yourself, Celeste. Imagine what your expertise and resources could do for the family business. We could modernize, expand, restore what this company has lost." I ran my finger over the raised lettering, feeling the texture beneath my skin. After years of dismissal, they finally found a use for me. Not as a daughter, not as a visionary, as a brand. "I appreciate the thought," I said, closing the folder with a soft click. Father exhaled, shoulders dropping in relief. "Good, good. We'll schedule the press conference for—" I didn't say yes. The words sliced through his relief like glass. He blinked, momentarily disoriented. "But you said—" "I said I appreciated the thought, that's all." I stood, smoothing my skirt. "I've been thinking, too, about legacy." Their eyes followed me warily as I pulled out my laptop, turning the screen toward them. The webpage glowed, the More Innovation Fund. A sleek banner displayed women in hard hats, lab coats, and business attire. "What is this?" Father demanded, leaning forward. "A $10 million endowment for women in STEM and manufacturing," I said. "Focused on Nebraska entrepreneurs. Applications are already open." The silence that followed was suffocating. "10 million?" Mother whispered. "To start," I replied calmly, closing the laptop. "These women will build companies that change the landscape of American manufacturing. They'll create jobs, innovations, entirely new markets. That is my legacy." Merrick's mouth opened, then closed again. Clayton looked away, his knuckles white as he gripped the desk. "But the family business," Father began. "Will remain exactly what it's always been," I interrupted. "Your legacy. I don't need it. I've built my own." The muscle in his jaw twitched, a familiar sign of frustration. I turned to Mother, catching her off guard. "I'd like you to join the board of directors, Mom. The fund could use your perspective." The room froze. Mother's water glass halted halfway to her lips. "Me?" she whispered. "She doesn't know the first thing about business," Father snapped. I met his glare evenly. She raised 3 children while managing this household, kept finances afloat, organized charitable events, built connections that benefited this company for decades. She has more experience in leadership than you ever admitted. Mother set her glass down carefully, her hands trembling. "Gordon always handled the important decisions," she said softly. "And how has that worked for you?" I asked. The silence pressed in. Finally, Mother lifted her chin. "I accept." Her words landed like stones thrown into still water. Father's fork clattered against his plate, his voice low with warning. "Lorraine." She straightened, more than I had ever seen her in my life. It's time I had a voice, too. The rest of dinner passed in a silence weighted with shifting power. Merrick studied his plate, Clayton stumbled through forced small talk, and Father carved the roast with short, forceful strokes. Mother, though, ate with unexpected appetite, her movements deliberate, as though she had discovered something new inside herself. Later that night, my phone buzzed with a flurry of messages. Cousin Rachel, needing funding for her skincare line. Aunt Patricia, asking for a loan for her son's tuition. The family tree had suddenly remembered I existed, branches reaching not for my heart, but for my wallet. The landline rang, the housekeeper answered, then called me over. "The Nebraska Chronicle wants to schedule an interview about raising a billionaire." I let out a short, bitter laugh. "Tell them we're unavailable," I said, the word we tasted sour in my mouth. Back in my room, I opened my laptop again, staring at the fund's homepage. I imagined women across Nebraska clicking apply, their ideas waiting to be born. This was where my resources belonged, not patching holes in my father's sinking empire. For the first time, I realized I didn't want their legacy. I wanted to rewrite the future. Weeks passed, and the tremors from that dinner never really settled. The fund's website was flooded with applications, more than I ever dreamed possible. Some were rough, handwritten proposals scanned and uploaded with crooked margins. Others came with carefully designed decks, polished to perfection. But behind each submission was the same heartbeat: women who had ideas, grit, and no one to believe in them. The first grant recipient was a woman named Jasmine. She was developing biodegradable packaging materials out of agricultural byproducts, something she'd tinkered with in her garage for years while working double shifts at a grain plant. When we called to tell her she'd been selected, she cried so hard she couldn't finish her sentence. I found myself blinking away tears too. This was it. This was what legacy should feel like, not inheritance, but ignition. Still, ripples from home reached me daily. Clayton called during one of our monthly video meetings, his voice hesitant. "Dad's seeing someone, a therapist. Dr. Hanover specializes in control issues." I froze. My father in therapy? The man who believed control was a virtue, who ruled over everyone with silence or fury. I couldn't picture him sitting in a chair, listening to someone else tell him what to do. "People can change," Clayton added, eyes flicking away from the camera. "At least that's what Dad's trying to learn." I wanted to scoff, but something in his tone held me back. Meanwhile, Merrick's calls grew more frequent. Sometimes he'd talk about small crises at the factory, fishing for advice he could package as his own. Other times, he'd stumble through apologies that never quite reached the words sorry. But my phone buzzed with another message that snapped me back into old wounds. Connor, my ex-boyfriend from Nebraska, the one who had once called my dreams cute, who suggested I focus on realistic goals. "Saw you in Forbes. Always knew you had potential. Coffee when you're in town?" The audacity almost made me laugh. I showed the message to Trish, my cousin, who rolled her eyes so hard I thought they might get stuck. "He's crawling back because you've got commas in your bank account now. Don't even answer." But I did. I typed out a single reply. "Thanks, but I prefer to leave the past in the past." I hit send, and the weight lifted instantly. A small act, but one that landed. It wasn't just about him. It was about everything. The family, the years of dismissal. I didn't need their approval anymore, and I didn't need scraps from the men who once told me I was asking for too much. Still, not all the ghosts were easy to ignore. At the next family gathering, Father raised his glass once more. "To my successful daughter," he announced, his voice careful, rehearsed, "who followed my advice and proved persistence pays." I almost choked on my water. My advice? He was already rewriting history again, this time in public. But instead of arguing, I smiled. I raised my own glass. "To family and to truth." The words hung there, pointed. Some nodded along, others shifted in discomfort. Father's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Later that night, I sat alone, scrolling through recordings on my laptop, snippets of his contradictory statements, proof of his lies, evidence of the revisionist history he tried to craft. My finger hovered over the delete key, then drifted back. I saved them into a separate folder labeled insurance. Not to use, just to keep. The truth didn't need to be weaponized, but it also didn't need to vanish. Meanwhile, the fund gained momentum. Newspapers picked it up. Universities reached out, asking if we'd collaborate on mentorship. Applications poured in from women who'd never had a chance to be heard before. And then there was Lacey. She sent me a video one night. Shaky camera. Laptop screen glowing in the dark. "Aunt Celeste, I finished the program. Look, it compiles." Her laughter filled the audio, giddy and unguarded. "I want to build something real like you." I watched the video 3 times, a smile tugging at my lips. Maybe, just maybe, the cycle of silence and erasure was breaking. But deep inside, I still wondered, was my father's therapy real change, or just another tactic? Could decades of control be undone in a few weeks of sessions? The question hung over me like a storm cloud. Because if he was changing, if he truly wanted something different, then I'd have to decide whether I wanted to meet him halfway, or whether some doors should remain shut forever. A year later, I turned into the familiar driveway, snow crunching beneath the tires of my Lucid Air. For the first time in almost a decade, I didn't feel like I was sneaking back into enemy territory. Through the windshield, I saw them waiting on the porch, not stiff and formal, but almost eager. My mother waved with both hands, unrestrained, the way I used to dream she might. "Aunt Celeste!" Lacey's voice carried across the yard as she bounded down the steps, tablet clutched to her chest. She had shot up in height, all knees and elbows, her awkwardness softened by the unmistakable light in her eyes. She pulled me inside before I could even set down my bag. "I have to show you this," she whispered, dragging me into a corner. On her screen, lines of Python code sprawled clumsy but brilliant. Mom said computers are for boys, but I showed her your TED Talk. And now, look. Her program sputtered, then produced a working output. She squealed and looked up at me, waiting for approval. I squeezed her shoulder. Keep going. The world needs your mind. Her smile lit up the room brighter than the Christmas tree. When we joined the others, I noticed the atmosphere had shifted. Same house, same garlands and wreaths, but the air was lighter. My brothers greeted me not with stiff handshakes, but tentative hugs. Merrick's eyes lingered with a flicker of apology still forming, Clayton's with something closer to respect. At the dining table, the battlefield no longer bristled with knives beneath the silverware. Father stood at the head, carving turkey with steady hands. His hair was more silver now, his posture less rigid. He lifted his glass. This year, he said, pausing to meet each of our eyes, I want to toast my children. All of them, each successful in their own way. I am proud of you. The words hung suspended in the room. A year ago, I would have clung to them like oxygen. Now, I accepted them with a smile, warmth without dependence. Mother leaned toward me during the meal. The neural interface your company developed for stroke patients, the Times called it revolutionary. I explained the technology, not shrinking or minimizing, letting the authority in my voice carry naturally. For once, no one rolled their eyes. The doorbell chimed. I rose to answer, and there she was, Miss Dobbins, my old computer science teacher, holding a bottle of wine. Her hair was shorter now, her back still ramrod straight, her eyes still sharp with belief. You remember Miss Dobbins, I said as I ushered her in, though of course everyone did. She had taught 3 generations of Moores, surviving even Father's budget cuts when he chaired the school board. Later, glasses refilled, I stood with mine in hand. To those who see our potential when we can't see it ourselves. Miss Dobbins blinked rapidly, her glasses fogging. Father nodded too, a subtle humility softening his usual stiffness. Across the table, Lacey leaned into her laptop again, whispering excitedly to Nico, who was asking her about debugging. My brothers listened, without condescension, as she explained. I caught the moment and tucked it away in my memory, proof that something real had shifted. And yet, beneath the warmth, a question lingered in me. Was this piece fragile, a performance we'd all agreed to for the sake of the season? Or was it the start of something new, something stronger than the lies and silence that once ruled this house? 6 months later, spring light flooded my San Francisco office. On the screen before me, 30 teenage girls from rural Nebraska filled a Zoom grid, faces glowing with eagerness. They were the first cohort of our virtual coding workshop, part of the More Innovation Fund. Never let anyone tell you what you can't build, I told them. My eyes landed on Lacey in one corner. She was already leaning toward the girl beside her, pointing at code, helping her debug. In that moment, I saw the future unfolding. Young women who wouldn't have to wait for permission, who wouldn't have to fight the same battles I did. Nico appeared at my office door, lanky and awkward, an earnestness in his eyes. The investors are here, Aunt Celeste. His summer internship with my company had already taught him more than 4 years of business school ever gave his father. On my desk sat a newly framed family portrait, taken at Easter. My mother stood tall, confidence radiating in her posture, the board seat suiting her like armor she never knew she had. My father stood beside me, not above me, his hand resting lightly on my shoulder instead of gripping it with control. My brothers flanked us. No longer golden sons, but simply men, still flawed, still learning. I thought of the first dinner, of the battlefield table where I had once been erased, and I thought of this picture, where no one stood higher than anyone else. For the first time, balance felt real. But tucked away in an encrypted drive was the folder labeled Insurance, the recordings of my father's contradictions, proof of every attempt to rewrite history. I had kept them safe, not to destroy him, but to remind myself. Truth mattered. My story mattered. And yet, I had chosen not to unleash them. Vindication would have tasted sharp, but fleeting. Change, real, stumbling, imperfect change, was worth more. Weeks later, I visited Nebraska again. The dining table gleamed as always, polished to perfection, but the air was different. My father raised his glass, his voice quieter now. To family, he said, and to learning when we've been wrong. I raised mine too, meeting his eyes. Not to forgive everything, not to forget, but to acknowledge movement, growth. After dinner, I stepped outside into the cool night. The windows glowed with lamplight, laughter carrying into the dark. I breathed in, the air sharper, freer than I remembered. Legacy, I realized, isn't the name etched on a building or the wealth passed in a will. Legacy is the door you force open so someone else can walk through it. Legacy is the voice you raise so others can find their own. I glance back at the house, once a fortress of silence, now a place where voices overlapped, messy but alive. I thought of Miss Dobbins, of the father in Detroit whose daughter had been saved by my program, of Lacey, already outpacing her peers, hungry to build. Would I choose vindication, the sharp satisfaction of saying I was right? Or would I choose this, a future where truth wasn't a weapon, but a foundation? The answer was clear. I turned toward the horizon, where morning would come soon enough.